Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. You are watching, and I'm speaking English because I have a very great guest, international reputable professor in finance and trade, and it's not always that we have one from our part of the world, looking back across the global economy and trade and making sense of what's relevant to us right here. And one of it is TPPA. Don't turn off the channel. I'm not going to go into the technicality of all the rules, regulations and all, but we're going to take a macro perspective and we're going to see it from a layman's perspective. That's why I'm very honored to have Professor Emeritus Dr. Salim Rashid, who has been around the world, looking in, looking out, looking in between. A lot of things that's impacting the financial world and also the real economy. And thanks to Universiti Utara Malaysia, UUM, he's now in the chair of the CIMB and UUM, professor for their economic and finance and also banking focus of studies there in Sinto. Since you're chairing the chair for CIMB in the Department of Economic Finance and Banking, UUM, so I know you just have given a presentation on TPPA. But before I ask about TPPA, its impact on banking, its impact on finance, and hence its impact on the consumers, the world is heading towards deregulation of things. ASEAN and East Asia is said to be one of the most deregularized, or one region that has really opened up, taking away barriers, deconstructing barriers of trades and laws for business to come in. So if I take that particular perspective, how do you see it from the academic point of view with that trend? Because if we can agree on how we see that, then we can go down to the finance, banking, trade, and the rest. So I'm going to ask your wisdom on that first.
The dominant mode of thinking in America, at least until 2008, when the Great Recession took place, was that trust the market. After 2008, there has been great self-doubt on that particular axiom. And perhaps those doubts have not filtered back to the rest of the world yet. But there is considerable disparity between the certainty with which people treat market-based economies and the uncertainty with which the Western world, particularly America, is wanting to reform itself so that it can actually make markets work for the public good.
Okay. The reason I asked that, because when I was really delving into the subprime crisis, it has to be traced all the way back to the 1930s, the Depression era, where the American lawmakers and regulators, they were looking at the Glass-Steagall Act. And the Glass-Steagall Act make a clear demarcation line in between finance and banking that you can use for savings, deposit, and loans for business in the real world, against the other side, which is the investment banking part, what we know as investment banking now, with its complexity of trading just on paper and stuff like that. So Glass-Steagall Act sort of started to take this barrier away. When Clinton came into office as President of the United States of America, he opened that up some more. And Laurie Sumner, who was part of the Clinton team and was later a huge part of the Obama's team looking at finance and banking, that's when we had the subprime crisis. So rules and regulations sometimes are there for a reason. And it's not as easy as seeing them as blocking freer trade. So since you have said that, he hasn't filtered back. But one thing that we know for sure, especially in Southeast Asia and ASEAN, is that from 97, 98, we know for sure that we have to have safeguards, we have to keep our house in order, we have to have transparency, and we have to have real controls over outflow and inflow especially financial ones, banking or otherwise. So how do you look at that? Because on one hand, yes, we want to facilitate trade. Even before the colonial period in Southeast Asia, our forefathers were seafaring people going as high up to India and Middle East, and then on this side to China. But with the modern day trade, and with finance a huge part of it, where do we balance between really regulating and protecting the interests of real economy, real people, and trying to get big money flows of direct investment and otherwise into the region?
The first point I think I should make is my views on the importance of the market are somewhat unorthodox in the following sense. I always say that free markets work when you have competent bureaucracies.
Okay.
Because to have a free market means that you let greed loose. Now, greed does not necessarily worry about the public good.
All right.
It has to be channeled so that it works towards the public good.
Okay.
That channel has to be decided by the bureaucracy. So on the one hand, you will say that you are having freer markets, but this is simultaneously imposing a greater responsibility on the bureaucracy to be more vigilant about the potential effects of that.
Okay.
Now, you went on to talk about the United States, and I think what happened in the United States is not the abstract realization that this is true, because the United States has, in my opinion, the best bureaucracy in the world.
Okay.
The most competent,
mechanism, system of governance. Okay.
Open, courteous, and self-questioning. But what happened in the years before the subprime crisis that you mentioned is more a belief that, yes, there are these potential problems, but if you leave it to the market alone will handle these. Okay. They will be internally handled.
All right.
And that is the assumption that failed. And most of all, I would ask that there were people whose responsibility it was to judge, are these loans proper or not.
So with that in mind, I have to go for the first break. But once we are back, let's map that onto TPPA. There's a lot of talk, chatters, especially on ground. It's a bit different in academia. It's very focused and directed. But the final outcome of everything has to be tested in the market itself. People who feel the impact, traders, consumers. So if I lay TPPA onto the discussion of regulations, financing and banking, what would your opinion be on the good and the bad? Because at the ground level, people just want to know whether it's good or bad for us. So I know it's not that simple intellectually in the discussion room, but if you have to answer out there to the layman, where and which position would you take on that? And we'll discuss that right after this. I'm already having a nice time with Professor Emeritus Dr. Salim Rashid, the CIMB Chair Professor in UUM for Economic Finance and Banking. Yes, it sounds complex, but I'm making it simple for all of us. And I studied a bit of economics in Form 6, but what I'm going to ask now is, a lot of people look at the TPPA as we're going to lose what we have. And that's the main fear of anything. Mums and pop shops, F-class contractor going to have to compete with China, strength in end-to-end supply chain and construction. But if I scope it to finance and banking, we will go back to regulations. We will go back to institutions which govern and execute the governance of regulations and rules and laws. So for the longest time, even until now, as post-97-98 has shown, that's why subprime crisis didn't really hit on our shores. Because the lesson we learned from the Asian financial crisis in 97 really instilled in us improvement of corporate finance, improvements of banking industry regulations, and oversight from institutions like Bank Negara, we have the SC, Securities Commission, we have the Bursa Malaysia, right where the studio is. So how would you map that to TPPA? Because whatever that we sign with TPPA, we still have to come through all these institutions and rules and laws that we already have to look at. And I think the main fear is, for example, if it's Bank Negara, we fear that Bank Negara's hand now will sort of be tied down a bit. How do you see it from what you have studied?
Let me focus initially on finance and banking. And I think what is very important to realize over here is that in addition to the main agreement, which has a lot of free trade language in it, there are annexes, and there are side letters. In this, the countries have provided their own stipulations about how the main text is to be interpreted. If you look at Annex 3 on banking, on finance, you will see that Bank Negara has not given up any substantial powers. Therefore, as far as the Malaysian situation is concerned, the financial markets and banking will remain virtually under the same control as they were before TPPA.
As if it's before TPPA. Right?
Exactly. So in this particular instance, the argument that I would put forth is this, that when you ask what is the impact of TPPA, you have to ask yourself, what is the direction we are in right now in Malaysia? And what additional impact would TPPA have? And when you look at the direction Malaysia has been taking for the last 10 years or 15 years, you will look at the Capital Markets Master Plan, the Financial Services Master Plan, and you will notice that TPPA makes a very marginal difference to this. So as far as finance and banking is concerned, Malaysia gives up very little in terms of control, but as a consequence, Malaysia is gaining something which you have not mentioned yet, and which I would like to bring forth, if I may. It is that the main advantage is probably not what will happen if you join, but what might have happened if you did not join. And that is a very important consideration. Because if you are a foreign investor and you're looking for a place to invest in, let's say, South Asia, Southeast Asia, you will want to be able to sell your products most cheaply in the world market. If you get preferential access to markets like America, Canada, Mexico, Australia, Japan, you have got a huge market. So where would you prefer to invest? In a country that has this guarantee of access, or in a country that does not? So this defensive argument is very important. I haven't seen it raised much in the popular literature, but it is also incalculable in the sense that I don't know how to put a number on this.
But it's huge.
But I can say that it is potentially huge. So we have to remember that the financial sector is being controlled. The real sector is being exposed to a variety of challenges. But those challenges may be worse if you do not join TPPA.
So if I look at it from the other angle, we should look at TPPA as finally one of the mechanisms that harmoniously ties up the interests of real economy and the might of the financial economy together towards a new, uncharted, harmonized market. Can I put it that way? Because sometimes we feel that like the financial economy have their own mind of where they want to go, and that might not be the interest of the real economy. For example, when money was flowing around the world, so when the equity capital market was not having a good day, they moved to the futures trading of commodities. And that sparked panic on this side of the world for food security, because suddenly grains went up 300%, and people are already buying forward because they're afraid that they will not be able to pay or get supply. And then big countries like Thailand, the exporter of rice, then started, I have to look at this. So will TPPA harmonize this better? Because you have supply and you have demand, and then you have the liquidity of whether it's capital market or other financial flows.
There are really two separate questions in what you said, and I would like to address both of them briefly. Okay. One is, are markets harmoniously arranged? Mm-hmm. The short answer to that is it cannot be. By definition, markets work by competition. Okay. Therefore, by definition, markets work with controlled instability. If everything is stable, then you don't have to worry about it. It's like
stable tension.
But you have to work within that instability. Okay. And that is the general answer. You also raised the question of food security. And this is one point at which, even though it is not within finance and banking, I have some strong opinions. Yeah. I think it is a mistake to rely on trade to obtain food security, mm-hmm. if you have the capacity to be food self-sufficient yourself. And this is probably not the time for it, but very quickly, I saw what was happening in the world markets in 2008, 2009. Okay.
It was bad, right?
And it was bad. Yeah. And I saw that even though countries had committed themselves to open trade in food, as mm-hmm. soon as there was 10% inflation domestically, mm-hmm. they were willing to raise import prices or export prices by 100%. In other words, countries who are buying food from these countries simply could no longer afford it.
Okay, cool.
Therefore, food security is a completely separate issue, mm-hmm. and it should be handled distinctly.
Okay, let's go for the last break. Once we are back, I want to grow out of the TPPA a bit. I want to look just at the fundamentals. And I've been discussing this since the day I started as a journalist, which is the flow of hot money. People who owns money only have money and don't want to have anything else, and they want to make money grow. So they will be looking at the highest return and in the shortest time. And that was the main premise behind subprime crisis, because it's supposed to give 20%, 30%, 40% return. But if you want stability, and that's the point about TPPA, it empowers you with a bigger market, but you have to build resiliency and you have to grow it. It's not an instant answer to your headache. But money flows, short-term money flows, big amount, fast, erratic, doesn't gel with sustainability of growing long-term development. We cannot eradicate poverty in 1 year, mm-hmm. but we can have inclusivity, mm-hmm. of economic principles and investment over a longer term. So how do we marry both? Because more and more, it's like people can really choose and switch fast where they want to decide to invest. We used to be the darling as the emerging miracle economy in the 80s with what, nearly 30% around that figure of the FDIs of the world. But then China, only 10 to 15 years later, came close to that and we went down. But now, people are saying China's slowing down, so they're looking at better markets and stuff like that. So where would the wisdom be in trying to balance all that? Only the professor knows, and we'll ask him after the short break. Thank you for still watching this very special session of Agenda Awani. Thanks to University Utara Malaysia, I have Professor Emeritus Dr. Salim Rashid, a world-renowned thinker and expert in economic finance and banking. And we're very fortunate that he's sitting there in UUM. I know it's way up north, but he's looking at what's the relevance of all this to us, for our country. And that's a very, very good thing to have. But I want to bring the masses closer to what you are doing and your thoughts. So if we think about it generally, the fear is that the financial market are running loose on its own with disregard to the real economy. Because emerging markets like Malaysia, and we are one of the front runners, is that we have built our economic progress for decades. And in 97, 98, somebody just hit that button and it reset everything for us maybe 10 to 15 years back. At least that's what Tun Mahathir said. But now, what's to ensure that that doesn't happen again? So how do you look at balancing and governing because governments still have lots of power and they can enact lots of power and they can run the rules over many things through regulations. But the trend is towards deregulation, and money flows are getting bigger and bigger. Funds that were billions before are now trillions. So trillions for economy like the emerging markets like Malaysia can really change things and impact real stuff. I was at first surprised when subprime crisis could really impact a country like Iceland, but it happened. So what's to be our insurance in this very complex financial and trade link going into the future, Professor?
The controls that Bank Negara still possesses over the exchange rate and over the balance of payments are adequate to bring an immediate stop to anything like a catastrophic flow one way or the other. The real fear in this case, I would say, is if the real economy, not a pun, but if the real economy is seen as faltering.
Okay.
Now, if the real economy is working well, and Malaysia is a country with an excellent reputation for law and order,
yes,
why would people want to pull out money? So people who put in hot money, and I'm not in favor of hot money, that's why I like the idea of capital controls being there. They're looking for profits. And as long as they see the real economy and law and order, they will not need to panic.
Okay.
So the action, A, can be controlled by Bank Negara, and B, the triggers for that action are elsewhere, not so much in the existence of hot money, but in the real economy. And I think if one focuses on that, one will not need to worry about these issues.
So continue doing what we do, improve and innovate where you have to, but basically rules of law, governance is already there for Malaysia. That's your verdict, right? And TPPA is not going to have anything much that is way outside of where Malaysia is already trying to improve, in whether it's the capital equity market or is it finance and banking. Okay, so we get that cleared. But before I let you go, hot money will be hot money. They will find a way, because it's like a chessboard, right? Looking at the whole global map and where do we go and stuff like that. So if trading is becoming more complex, if the role of finance is especially more crucial, because real economy is about supply and demand, but supply and demand will also be influenced by where the ability of having cash in hand is. And the darling used to be China, but maybe when China is slowing down, it gives a new sense of balance to the world. No more rushing, no more, some people like to call it casino capitalism, but I like to think of it as a gold rush. So how do you see East Asia playing a role, our intellect, our leaders, our thinkers, of giving out a new East Asia model that is more sustainable for us? And I think there was a World Bank look at East Asia model before. And do you see us innovating just like we innovate for the poor to have the ability to have cash with Grameen Bank and everything else? Can we innovate now at this level?
This is my personal opinion as to what I see as one potential way forward. And the East Asian model relied heavily on state-directed credit and state-directed investment. That is actually ruled out by TPPA.
Okay.
So Malaysia cannot go that path anymore. But on the other hand, Malaysia has now grown so much, Malaysia does not need to grow down that path. The question is, what is the best way forward? At the same time, everybody recognizes that coordinated investment action can be beneficial for a growing economy. How can this coordination come about? One possible way is to have activist banks. Banks which not only lend money to entrepreneurs who want to make things, but banks who actively look for profitable opportunities and foster the entrepreneurship that will take up this challenge. This is nothing that new. In one sense, it is going back to the model of what is called German banking in the late 19th century through the early 20th century. And it requires somewhat more, what shall I say, knowledgeable, involved, and directed banking
Specific
systems.
and targeted.
Yes.
Pinpoint accuracy. I like that, but that's all the time that we have. I'm going to ensure our friends in UUM keep our line open so we can continue to delve further into activist banking. I like that. My friends in banks would have to answer for that because I want to ask them whether they have been thinking about it. Because the complaint right here in Malaysia is that money is there, funds are there, but entrepreneurs saying, yeah, but we can't get it. It's so tough to get. So activist banking is one of the way to go. UUM will help solve that angle for us. Thank you so much to Professor for making time to be here. Thank you for coming to Malaysia in the first place. Welcome. Thanks to UUM for making it possible for this recording of this session to happen. And thanks to you for watching. Hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri pada semua platform yang Astro Awan ni ada. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. Muat turun aplikasi Mudah Alih iOS dan Android dan anda boleh menonton secara langsung dan juga memberikan komen di gadget Mudah Alih kegemaran anda. Selamat malam. Terima kasih. InsyaAllah kita jumpa lagi. Thank you so much.